Magandang araw. Ako si Kui Code. Welcome back to my channel where I teach Python through fun and practical examples. Today we'll be continuing software design patterns. But one thing I wanted to mention is that in the last video I went over our first design pattern known as a singleton. What I didn't mention is that there are different types of design patterns. The first is creational. Creational design patterns abstract the instantiation process. They help make a system independent of how objects are created, composed, and represented. Then we have structural patterns, which are concerned with how classes and objects are composed to form larger structures. Lastly, we have behavioral patterns, which are concerned with algorithms and the assignment of responsibilities between objects. So the singleton is a creational pattern, but in this video we're going to be talking about a structural pattern, which is the adapter. So sometimes when you're making a game, you run into a situation where two things don't quite work together. Like if a game was built initially for keyboard controls, but then you need to add in controller support. So instead of rewriting everything, we can use the adapter pattern. The pattern acts as a translator, allowing incompatible systems to work together without changing their original code. So in this video, we'll go into the details of the adapter pattern. We'll show why it works and why it's useful. So I just have some basic code here just to start. So we have a keyboard class here. We have different inputs like pressing A to something, pressing D to something, pressing spacebar. So this is just moving and jumping. So when you call these methods, it just prints out some text. And then we actually have our game representation here. So you can just pass in the actual keyboard input into the game, and then when you call the game's methods, it does something. Um, so we go ahead and run this. So as you can see, when you're using a keyboard, you can move left, you can move right, and then you can jump. But the problem with this is, if you wanted to later on add controller, this won't work because controller doesn't have spacebar. Controller doesn't have a D key, and even though controller does have an A key, that's just kind of like a coincidence that a controller maybe sometimes has an A, whereas maybe PlayStation doesn't have an A, but Xbox and Nintendo controllers do have an A. So that is kind of a weird situation. So how do we deal with this? Well, we can make an adapter. Which is able to translate between the button you're pressing, whether it's keyboard or controller, and the actual method that needs to be called to do the function in the game. So, as an example, if we just copy this and just make a controller class as well, like that, the method names are different because they do different stuff. Like this is using the D-pad, and then this again, if this is a PlayStation controller, it would have it would have like a different button, or like a triangle button or a square button or whatever. So then you would have to make a controller object, somehow pass the controller object into the game, but then all of these methods would still be the same. But then how would you implement them in here? You need to put in a bunch of if statements to say, well, if you pass in a controller, then you need to do this one. If you pass in a keyboard, you need to do this one. And that's just kind of annoying because whenever you add in something new later on, you're going to have to redo this whole thing. So instead, and this is kind of, based off of my last video, or not the last video, but the one before that called abstraction, we can actually just make an abstract class. So first I'll import some stuff. So from ABC, import ABC and abstract methods. Okay, I got that. And now we can do class called game input ABC, which is the parent. And now I'll just copy just so we can save some time here. Now these are the three methods: move left, move right, and jump. So regardless if you're on a keyboard or a controller, you're still going to be able to move left, move right, and jump. So this is abstract, which means you can't make an object out of this. Instead, you need to make an implementation using inheritance. And then in those concrete implementations, then you would be able to define how you want these to work. But we'll be able to make two of them. One will be for keyboard and one will be for controller. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's just do the keyboard one first. So class keyboard adapter will take a game input object, or sorry, not a game input object. It's a child of game input, which now means that you have to define these methods inside of this class. But first we'll just get our init here, self. Because this is a keyboard, we're obviously going to pass in a keyboard object. Self.keyboard equals keyboard. And like I said, these have to be implemented down here. So we'll just copy and paste them. Get rid of this. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. Don't need pass. Fix the indentation. All right, and then for move left, we can just simply call self.keyboard. And keyboard, we already know what method it is. Press A key. And then we can do the same thing for these two, which do that. This is going to be the D key on keyboard, and this is going to be press spacebar on keyboard. And then the next one is the controller adapter. Class controller adapter, also game input. It's going to have an init. Pass in self. Pass controller this time. Self.controller equals controller. And then we'll just do this. Delete that, delete that, delete that, delete this, delete this, delete that. Fix the indentation. And this is just self.controller. But now the controller has one called press D-pad left to move left. This is press D-pad right to move right. And this one is going to have press A for that. And now we'll just go ahead and edit this. So we have our keyboard object, but instead we need to make our keyboard adapter equals keyboard adapter. We can just pass in our keyboard. And then we can do the same thing for the controller as well. Controller is the controller object. We got a controller adapter, controller, and controller. So now we have our adapters, and let's look at game. For game, we can pass in, well, this is obviously going to have to be changed because we hard code it to this. But we can just pass in the one that we want to use. So we'll just default to the keyboard. So rather than passing in the keyboard itself, we can pass in the keyboard adapter. But instead of passing in the keyboard itself here as well, because it's an adapter, which the parent class is game input, we can just do game input. Make this lowercase. This is the variable name. This isn't needed, but it's just saying that this is the type, the class type that you're expecting. So now that we're expecting a game input object, we can just change this to, actually, maybe this will be, I'll just change to input device, which is a game input, and then self.input device equals input device. That way we can just pass in the controller adapter and it works, and then we can also pass in the keyboard adapter and it still works. And now what we do for move left, rather than doing our keyboard dot whatever, we can pass in, or we can call input device move left, because the keyboard adapter and the controller adapter, because they're both coming from the game input parent, they have the same method names. So for this, we can just do input device dot move left, and then input device dot move right, and then input device dot jump. So that would still work. And let's continue here. So we have our game object. We're passing in the keyboard adapter to start. And then this will just be the same because those methods were already, the methods didn't change. Let's go ahead and run this. Make sure we don't have any errors. Where did I put B key from? Press A. That's supposed to be D key, I believe. That would make more sense for the keyboard adapter. Yes, that's a D key, okay. And yes, try this again. Right, so now we have keyboard. It still works with the keyboard. And then here's the nice thing. All we have to do now is literally do game.inputDevice equals controller adapter. And that's it. We're literally just changing the game input device variable to the controller adapter. And then we just do this. We just call the same methods, but instead of using keyboard, it's going to be use controller. And now look at that. Now it's using the controller version. So this way, all we have to do is, like, imagine if you're playing a game and you go to the settings, you literally hit one button or you save the information, and all it does is call this based off of which one. Like if you have controller selected, it'll just default it to controller adapter, and if you change it back to keyboard, it'll change it to keyboard adapter, and that way it still works and does whatever you need to in the game. So how it fits with the adapter pattern, the controller's built-in inputs like A and left and right are adapted into standardized player actions like move and jumping. The game logic doesn't need to care about raw input because everything is translated, and you can say the same thing about using the keyboard. So if you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe. Also, let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions for future videos. See you next time on Kuyu Code. Paalam.